She had so many wonderful stories. But one day, as I was sitting on her end of her bed, she began to tell me all her regrets in life. And she began to tell me, does talking about death and dying scare you?
Death is a natural part of life, but it's a topic most of us prefer not to discuss. Still, normalizing these conversations can help us process our own relationship with death, empowering us to make peace with our mortality.
In today's episode, we have an open conversation about death, dying, and how to start living life to the fullest whilst embracing your own mortality.
Let's dive in. Welcome to Rewrite Your Story, the podcast where change begins with you.
We're your hosts, Stephen and Sharlene.
As professional coaches and mentors trained in various modalities, we have helped hundreds of people
Bridge the gap between the person they are
and the person they want to be.
We bring you conversations with real people who have overcome real setbacks.
You will walk away with practical steps to find more clarity, alignment, and success in any area you want to improve.
So join us and discover how you have the power to overcome, to change, and to rewrite your story.
So pick up the pen. Your new chapter starts now.
Well, today, Sharlene, we're going to be talking about a topic that we're quite passionate about, but can be considered a little bit heavy or taboo or dark, maybe. We're going to be talking about death, dying, and why actually normalize death and dying.
Yeah, it's going to be a really, hopefully not too heavy session today.
But it's really important that we actually embrace death and we embrace dying, because when we embrace death, we can actually discover our purpose and live a more fulfilling life.
Absolutely. It's going to be so exciting to just rediscover a new purpose in our life.
And so let's talk a bit about why me and you are passionate about death and dying. So my passion's a weird word, isn't it? I'm passionate about death and dying. Well, what I mean by that is my background is in palliative care. And so before we went into coaching and stuff like that, I, many years ago, was a nurse and gravitated towards palliative care and have assisted a lot of people and being with a lot of people during the final moments of their life. And I'm going to share some stories throughout. And when I say stories, not stories about someone dying, but lessons that I learned through the process. And because I'm no longer a registered nurse and no longer work in nursing, I am a death cafe facilitator, which basically death cafes are where groups of people come around and we talk about death and dying, and we try to normalize the discussion by giving people advice on how to talk about death and dying. People might be terminal and attend, or people might have lost someone and attend, or someone just wants some good advice on, they're not dying, but they just want practical advice on how to approach the subject with an elderly parent, for instance, or how to approach the subject with their partner or with their children on death, dying, and what their wishes are.
No, I think firsthand, having had an early death in the family when I was 25, having my father pass away, not ever having really spoken with him about the concept of death or what that means for us. So just losing him all of a sudden was like, and not having had that conversation was like, it was so important for me to know what to do next. So if I could help to alleviate that pain for someone else and help someone be able to be in the know as to how to approach these subjects with other people, that would be really rewarding for me.
And you are a death cafe facilitator as well. What is your experience around facilitating death cafes, and why do you find it?
Absolutely. You see so many different people from all walks of life, and they just like a lot of people have either not even thought about what it would mean for them to approach a subject with their loved ones, or, actually what it's like to prepare. Like they had never thought about preparing all their things, like getting her affairs in order. As we hear a lot of doctors saying, like when people that are terminal, they say, get your affairs in order. But why do we have to wait for our affairs, for something to be really bad for us to get our affairs in order?
Yeah, and like if you look at us, we're not terminal, we're definitely not dying, or we don't plan on dying, but we've got everything in order.
Oh, yeah. And that, just having done that surprisingly really took a weight off my shoulders. I always used to be really scared of like a lot of things in life, like the actual concept of death and like having all these worries about the future. But having done that practice, going through all those things, getting our affairs in order, really took that load off my shoulders.
Yeah. And so I guess what we're going to do is we're going to talk about death and dying, and we're going to talk about why it's important to have those conversations around death and dying. But also we're going to talk about why once we embrace death, once we embrace that we're actually mortal and we are going to die, we can start living.
Yes, I love that.
And I think we'll start with a quote. We'll start with Socrates, if you want to.
Absolutely. So Socrates says, "To fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not. No one knows whether death may not be the greatest of all blessings for a man, yet men fear it as if they knew that it is the greatest of evils."
And I think that's really important because we fear it thinking that it's the greatest of evil, but we don't know, you know. And I actually like what Paul Songer said. And if you look at him, he died quite young. He died at the age of 55 with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he was a senator in the US. And he said, "Don't fear your mortality, because it is the very mortality that gives meaning and depth and potency to all the days that we are granted." And I think that's really important because, you know, if we don't fear it, then we're grateful for the days we have. Once we actually debunk death and dying and have open conversations, we can actually start living.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, I feel like it's not even so much having a blatant, non-fear of it, but it's just having a healthy respect for the topic of death, knowing that for our mortality, having a healthy respect for our mortality, appreciating that we're not here, none of one's going to get out of here alive. But the fact is that if we had that healthy respect for that, we would take all the moments that we have and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think if we look historically, culture has a lot to play with the discussions around death and dying and why it's taboo. Like there's negativity, like you might have been brought up in a family where we don't talk about that we don't celebrate that. But then there's other cultures that do actually talk about death a lot and celebrate death. Like if we look at Mexico, the Day of the Dead, that's a whole day where people come together and honor their dead and all that. And that's, like that might be a way to ease the grief or ease the discussion about death. Indonesia, yeah. You knew where I was going. This tribe in Indonesia where they actually keep the dead person in their house for up to 4 to 5 years, and with preserving oils and things like that. And then once they have the ceremony 4 or 5 years later, once a year or once every so often, they actually bring the dead person out of the grave, and
it's still in their shrine.
Yeah, and they just talk to that person as though that person is still there. Now, again, these are not practices that I would embrace, but it just goes to show that some cultures, it's a no-no, whereas some cultures, they actually do embrace it. So I guess it's about, why do you feel there is anxiety around talking about death?
I think there's a lot of issues around people just skirting around other people's feelings, worried that, how are they going to take it? Not wanting to cause anyone fear or anxiety or make someone upset about it. I think also a lot of it's come from the Western culture where children have no longer been part of the process of the death. Everything's taken away. It's institutionalized. People have taken the dead people away from the house. So children don't have that exposure anymore. So they're not knowing about these things. So there's always this unknown. No one knows what's happened. No one knows what goes on after death. So what 1 minute you're here, the next minute you're gone.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because if you look at, in the early 19th century, death was still, the care of the body was still done at home. And the funeral procession or whatever used to happen from the house. Like they would go from the house to, and that body was in the house for, 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it was. And you're so right. It's so institutionalized now.
Sure.
Why is it important to encourage open discussion and prepare emotionally?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's really important because you're preparing the people around you, whether you're the person that's going or, you need that closure yourself, or, you need to talk about these things so that you know what to prepare. Like it's all part of, psychological preparedness. You're getting yourself prepared for the inevitable in the future so that there's no more of this anxiety about what's going to happen. If you are open to talking about it, then you don't have to worry about it so much every single day, like in the back of your mind. Of course, I think consciously we're not actually going around every day thinking about it, but having the open conversation, and we're not talking about every single day, but like at least once in a while, just having the open conversation, talking to people, it gives us that freedom and that safety to talk about something that we may be afraid of usually, and then just facing it.
Yeah, and I think too, Sharlene, like if we open it and we talk about it, there needs to be also discussion around your end of life wishes.
Yeah.
Not only your end of life wishes as in to what type of care you want to receive. For instance, do you want to die at home, or do you want to die in hospice? But also the implications that that's going to have on your family members. So having that discussion as well is so important. But also if you're a carer for someone, it's really important that you know their wishes as well, because in my experience as a nurse, when I was in palliative care, there is a lot of guilt and grief with families that don't know if they're doing the right thing for their loved one.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of guilt in families that don't know whether they should still pursue active treatment or they should allow the person to pass. Yeah. And again, that goes to knowing that person's wishes. And so by you knowing what you want, then you can actually have that discussion with others much better. For instance, we have spoken about our end of life choices, and I have personally feel that I don't need to die at home because I know what it takes to care for someone in their home. Yeah. And I don't want anyone to do that for me. I would prefer them to, if I'm in a hospice, for my loved ones just to be there while the nurses do what they have to do, for instance. Whereas I have cared for many family members.
I've seen you do that.
You've seen me do that. Time after time. I've cared for many family members in their home and supported the most immediate family while that person was allowed to transition in the house, and I've been there as a support person. And I also cared for my father when he passed away in the house. So
that's a beautiful gift that you've given them, Stephen.
Well, thank you. But knowing that was their wishes. So I think people's wishes need to come in play. Now, we know circumstances doesn't always allow for people's wishes to come into play, and that should not be a reason for guilt as well.
That's right. And I think that's why it's so important to have those open conversations to cover all different basics, so that, if the situation came up, so yes, these are some of the things that I'd like to happen, but I'm taking the onus off you. Like, should anything happen, if it doesn't happen the way I expected it to, if I don't die that particular way or whatever, then, here's some other options as well. You know what I mean? Like looking at different options that could cover those situations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, looking at the medical model of death and looking at the actual what happens to someone as they're dying, if you're doing that at home and if you are caring for someone at home, it's really good to get a support mechanism like a death doula.
Yes.
We know many death doulas in our field of practice, or a palliative care team that will guide you through that process, because there are things that a person will experience as they're dying that can be distressing to the family, but they're not distressing to the actual person.
Yeah.
And so having that person be that tour, can I call it a tour guide? That tour guide guiding you through the process is really important as well.
Yeah, it's because not everyone's going to have that palliative background like you do. Yeah. So families that are looking after their loved ones at home need someone who can explain what's going on and to guide them along the process to help care for that person, or even for the person who's going. They may not be in the end stages yet, but for them to be able to be prepared. So that's another service that they offer, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If I look at some of the common misconceptions when I was a nurse, I'm a big believer in morphine when a person is dying to relieve the pain, to relieve the anxiety. And people would say to me, the family would say, but if you give too much morphine, you're going to kill them. And no, that's not the case. That's a huge, I don't know even what to call it. It's a huge myth. Yeah, it's a huge myth because the body will only take, the morphine, when someone is dying, someone is in increased pain. So you're going to need more and more. And when I look at that, the person is dying anyway. So the morphine's not going to actually kill that person. They are dying. Let's make them as comfortable as possible during that process. And that's why it's good to have someone guiding you along the way.
I think what the thing is, people think that the morphine's going to kill them sooner. But what they don't realize is that's probably their time anyway, but you're just allowing them to feel comfortable to do so, giving them that space and that, that comfort to be able to do what they need to do to transition from one side of life to another.
Yeah, and it's actually not going to kill them. It's just going to provide comfort. So, Sharlene, moving on, what are the consequences of not talking about death and things like that?
Gosh, so many consequences, the guilt that's left behind, the anxiety of not knowing, what do I do now? Like, if you haven't had those discussions, like, how do I handle this? Or the person themselves going will be left with all these regrets, not having expressed anything or not being able to express anymore what they really want, like how they would like to see themselves going, right?
Yeah, because it doesn't stop at death. Death is not the final passage when a person is dying. We still have preparations to make. We still have funeral arrangements.
Right.
And it's knowing what that person's wishes are, because there are so many options now. There's cremation, there's burial, there's aquamation, there's composting is a thing. It's not available in Australia yet. Aquamation's not available in Australia, but there are other parts of the world that is available. So what does the person want for their body post-death? Do they want to be donated? And we know that if someone is donated to an university, you have to move really quickly. You've got a 2-hour window period from the time of death to transportation. So it's knowing all of the information that person or their wishes post-death.
Yeah. And I think it's also, you look at all the family dramas that come out of it too, you know what I mean? Like, people not knowing what's happening, then they get into all these arguments about this is what they want, this is what they shouldn't do, or they shouldn't do this, But I think as well, if you're worried about talking to your family straight away about all of these kind of issues, I think it's a good thing to get your affairs in order first with like a state, to have some like a mediator, to talk to a mediator first, get your affairs in order, and then have someone help you. So get a mediator in to talk with your family on your behalf.
Now, how are some strategies that you can open the discussion, or how can you have this open communication with others?
That's a good question. And I think a lot of things you might need to consider having, I guess, not so much a fun environment, but maybe a light environment where it's not too heavy, something they all enjoy doing together. And just listen out for little clues, like in the conversations, things that you can point towards. What happens in that situation? What are you worried about? Like, what are things, like, how would you, like, what would happen if you were to die? Like, what would you want to happen? Especially if you're the one who's dying, like, take it off yourself first and put it back on the other people. So, like, how would you feel? What would you like to happen? And then that opens a pathway for them to say, well, what about you? Then that will get them to ask you those questions. How would you like to die? What would you like to happen if something happened to you?
And I think it's really important that we also have them written down somewhere.
Yeah.
There's some great resources online. I know that in Australia, there's an organization called the Groundswell Project, which talk about death, dying, and they have some great resources available, even some discussion points as well. And they have things like, how to create an advanced healthcare directive, how to have clear communications, how to express your personal wills. They've even got a funeral planner that you plan your own funeral, and what kind of music do you want? What do you want to be dressed in? Some people do a video.
I was just so thinking, Stephen, a lot of the times that people are worried about approaching this subject is because I've heard it many times that children will come around and say, well, we're not ready to lose you yet, or you're not going to die yet. You're okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry.
Yeah, we get that a lot at death cafes where older parents are saying, my children aren't open and I want to share my wishes. And I think just because someone's talking about what their wishes are does not mean they're dying. It means they've embraced the reality of life. We are born, we live, we die. And I think children allow your parents to have the opportunity to tell you what they want because that's their right, and you shouldn't take that away from them, because that's going to bring them peace, them comfort, and allow them to live the rest of their lives knowing that they're going to be okay.
Yeah. I guess a lot of people feel like maybe it's rude to talk about the other person's death and, what they want, or to ask their parents about, what do you want to happen when you die? Because they think, that parent's going to think, do you want me to die already?
Yeah.
But that's far from the truth, it's if you approach the subject very respectfully and gently, and especially if you're the person that is wanting to get the affairs in order, just being mindful about where they might be and say, I want to talk about a few things. And it doesn't mean I'm going to die tomorrow. We never know when we're going to die, but I just want to make sure that everything's settled in the future. And if we can get this out of the way, then I can continue living without worrying about it.
Question.
Yes.
Have you spoken to your mother about it?
Oh, my mom talks about it all the time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. She's we never used to talk about it before, but I think she's learned from after my dad died.
Yeah.
Like that.
He was 52 when he died, and your mum was 51 when he died.
Look, my mum used to talk about it to me as well. I used to say, don't talk about it. Don't worry about it. You're going to, you're going to live. No, I used to. So I was guilty as well. I used to be one of those, daughters. And I would say, don't talk about it. Don't worry about it. You're going to live, right? But after having gotten my own affairs in order, I realized how important it is to listen to the other person's wishes.
Yeah, cool. So let's look at what are some practical things that actually talking about death and dying actually does when you have those conversations. First of all, it's the psychological and practical preparedness.
I think regular discussions can help, death lose its sting, that sense of, not knowing what's going to happen in the future or what's going to happen if I die, having that psychological preparedness, knowing that, everyone's taken care of and looked after, and then you don't have to worry about that. You settled it in your heart.
That's really good. And by actually talking to your loved ones about death and dying, you're preparing them as well.
Yeah, it's a gift, really.
It doesn't mean that they grieve less. It means that they grieve, they're more prepared in their grief.
That's right.
Not the what if.
And makes the transition a lot smoother than it would be if they weren't prepared. The other fact is as well that a lot of people think that if they talk about death and dying before they're ready, that something's going to happen straight away. It doesn't mean that. And it doesn't mean that if you give all your wishes, that if you change, it's going to be stuck that way. Our wishes are a constantly evolving thing. We can change them anytime, but we just need to make sure that we update them as we go along. So as long as, you're prepared to talk about it, then know that you can always change those wishes as you go along. Even in our goals change every day, right? Or from year to year or 5 years. So it doesn't mean that it's set in stone.
And so by having the discussion around death and dying, you're actually normalizing it.
Yeah.
And that's our whole point. We want to normalize this discussion and we reduce the fear associated with death. The second point that talking about death and dying actually does, it strengthens relationships and helps manage grief. Yeah. So open discussion about death can actually strengthen relationships between people by fostering a new openness and helping manage that grief more effectively.
Absolutely. Well, one of the main points of having a healthy relationship is being vulnerable, right? And what more vulnerable topic to talk about than your own mortality?
Absolutely. Let's look at, once we've had the discussions, once we've embraced death, how do we start living?
How do we start living? Right?
Okay. I heard this the other day, and I'm trying to think of that person's name, Priscilla Shire. So I was listening, and I was watching a reel, and she was talking about living your life on purpose and living your life according to your destiny and fulfilling that destiny and that purpose. And she said, there's no age to start living. Like you young person who is 20 to say, I'm still young to live for God or to live for my purpose. She's saying, if you die at 30, you've only got 10 years worth of living. And she said to you, you old person in your 60s that say, I'm too old. But if you live until 100, you've got 40 years of living and destiny to fulfill. So age is not relevant when it comes to living because it's the amount of days that we actually have. And I thought that was so good. Yeah. So when we actually embrace our mortality and we embrace that our days here are numbered, we start to live every day with urgency. Do you know what I mean? And I just think that's really cool. And so I was listening to her and I was like, okay, let's what Bible verse or something can I find out of this one? Okay. And the only one that really came to my mind is when the man came to Jesus in Matthew 8 and said, what my Lord, I want to follow you. And Jesus said, well, but first he said, I want to bury my father. And Jesus said, follow me and let the dead bury the dead. And I thought, oh, okay, so we're talking about death. Let's use that one. But I want to put a different spin on it, So Jesus said, follow me, but he said, I want to bury my father first. And people will think, well, that's a bit harsh. Jesus is saying, well, you can't bury your father. Well, when we dive into that, his father wasn't actually dying. He was like saying, I just wait. And then after I spent my time with my family, and actually, if you look deeper, a lot of scholars think he was waiting for his inheritance. Okay. Which is, hey, nothing wrong with that, But what I get out of this is that this man had his priorities wrong.
Yeah, way out of order.
He had them out of order and he missed the sense of urgency for living in the moment. Like he had an opportunity there to walk with Jesus. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? To be one of Jesus' disciples. Now, whatever that is in your world today, it could be a major goal that you or a major purpose that you're being called to, but your priorities aren't in order and therefore you're missing out. So when we actually embrace death, we start living with that sense of urgency. And my question is there anything like this man that is dead in your life that's holding you back?
Yeah. And we're not talking about a dead relationship that can probably come back to life. We're talking about things.
Yeah. Or, sometimes they are relationships that you need to cut your
After you've done everything that you can possibly do. It's not going anywhere.
Sometimes we just need to cut our dead cats loose, and we're not talking about husband and wife relationship or different kinds of relationship. Yeah, find your tribe that's going to support you in achieving your goals and living in that urgency. So is there anything holding you back? So sometimes we don't want to let go of things because we think we're going to miss out on something.
Absolutely.
Like he probably thought he's going to miss out on an inheritance, but yet he got to work. He could have, walked with Jesus, and witnessed all those miracles in his life. So I'm just wondering, is there anything that you're thinking, oh, I've still got time, I've still got, resources? Are there things holding you back that you're giving more importance to or priority to that you actually should? Are these things stopping you from embracing the life you have now?
Yeah, because so many times we'll have that one opportunity come knocking on our door. And it knocks so loudly, but then you've got all these comfortable things in place. But there's this really great opportunity that could present so much more than what you already have. But because you're comfortable with what you have, is that holding you back from actually fulfilling your purpose and destiny?
Absolutely. And I think that brings us on to procrastination versus action. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when we become aware that we only have an infinite amount of days left, we start and we're aware of our mortality. This can actually motivate us for immediate action and prioritization of our life's goals. But it also allows us to think, well, actually, what goals in the length of thing aren't actually going to serve me? Do you know what I mean? And so it actually allows you to align yourself with your purpose. It allows you to align yourself with your destiny because you're living for the end. You're living for what the final goal was. And it reminds me, this just came into my mind, that scripture that says, I press forward, not looking at the things behind. I can't even remember it. But it goes something like, I press forward, looking ahead. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to look ahead at the number of years we have left and really take action in prioritizing what's important to us.
So then I guess it's not about the amount of time or lack of time that we have, but what we do with the time that we do have here on earth.
Absolutely.
In every single moment. Yeah.
And it brings us to when we embrace death, when we embrace the discussion around death and dying, we actually begin to live with purpose. I love what Winston Churchill said. He said, it's not enough to have lived. We should be determined to live for something.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people are like, well, I don't know what what are my days meant to be? What is this purpose? What purpose should I have with what I have left? And when I say what I have left, you could have 100 years left. Like, I'm not saying you've only got 5 years left, but if we live every day as though we have a short amount of time left, we will do much more. And that's when we embrace our death. But I love what Bishop T.D. Jakes says. He says, if you can't figure out your purpose, figure out your passion. For your passion will lead you right into your purpose. Usually what we're passionate about unfolds as our purpose.
Yes, I love that. It's the thing that just really gets you up in the morning, the thing that really gets under your skin and just makes you want to get out there and do something. And it's the thing that wakes you up on the inside.
So I think as people, what we need to do is we need to reflect on our values and define our own personal purpose that really resonates in our lives.
Absolutely.
And that purpose may be like, one of our purpose is to normalize the discussions around death. We might have a really busy week. We might be tired. We might be exhausted. And we're like the night before, oh no, death cafe. Like, do we really have to do that? But it's amazing how energized we get once we're there.
Like, once you get into it, like, oh my gosh, I got so much energy now. You could just forget about all that drudgery at the beginning, but you just come back alive because you realize how much you love it.
And I think what I love about Death Cafe is like, we've done, heaps of them. Never any the same.
They're all different.
And the discussions take so many different tangents, and there's never been one experience the same. And I just think that's so important as well. So what we encourage you is to evaluate your life's direction and ensure it aligns with your own personal growth and values, and discuss with people, discuss with your friends. If you don't know what you're good at, if you don't know what you're passionate about, ask people, Or another thing is, you could just, what do you talk most about? What is the one thing that you could talk for hours and hours about, And these are great ways to start discovering your purpose. These are great ways to start discovering what you're passionate about, and then make daily choices.
And even if you're not sure what that is, like if you don't have something that you feel like you could talk about forever, it's about just being willing to try different things. Go out there and learn a new skill, learn something different, or find something different. Join a group, or find something that really gets under your skin and really brings that alive. And just be willing to fail. Like, don't worry. Like, if you don't find it straight away, there'll be something else that comes along. But don't be afraid to try new things each time.
Yeah. And I think the final point about embracing death and dying and opening the discussion is the legacy and impact that you can start having now, so that once you've passed and once, you've left this earth, what is the legacy you're going to leave? And I'm going to share a story in a moment, but before I share the story, I want to just read a quote, and it's by Shannon Al, and she says, "Crave your name on hearts, not tombstones. A legacy is etched in the minds of others and the stories they share about you." I just think that's so powerful. I want to read it again. "Crave your name on hearts, not tombstones. A legacy is etched into the minds of others and the stories they share about you." So I'm going to share a story, and And Sharlene, you know this story, but I haven't shared it in a long, long time. So when I left high school, one of my first jobs was in an aged care facility. And at that point, I was not really knowing what I wanted to do in life. And I didn't really think, I absolutely didn't want to do nursing. That was for sure. But it was the gateway that opened, and it was just a job at the time. And I received a job as a recreational person. So I would play bingo, I would go on bus trips with the residents in the aged care facility. There was a particular old lady, and she was in her 80s at the time. And I just grew very fond of her. And, you know, this was, well, I'm almost 50 now. So we're talking over 30 years ago. So we're talking quite a long time ago. So I can imagine she's passed. But, you know, the fact that I'm still telling this story means that her legacy lives on. And she was married. She never had children. She had nieces and nephews that would come and visit her. She was in the aged care facility, but she would not leave her room until 11:30 every day because her makeup had to be immaculate. So even in her late 80s, she would put on her makeup, do her hair and all that. And she was one of those ladies that I would just sit on the edge of her bed and listen to her stories. You know, she had so many wonderful stories. But one day, as I was sitting on her end of her bed, she began to tell me all her regrets in life. And she began to tell me everything that she regretted doing and everything, but most of all, everything she regretted not doing that she had wished she had done. And I remember in that moment, it was like I was transported into the future. And it was just my imagination. And I just remember sitting as an old man in that chair where she was talking to me with a young teenager trying to figure out what he wants in life, listening to me and me telling him my regrets of everything I had not done in life. And I remember coming to, and I was a bit shaken, and I was I was really shaken, and I was a bit like out of it. But I remember saying to myself, I never want to be in that position. I never want to be in the position where someone is listening to me as an old person, telling them all my regrets of the things I never did in life, you know? And I just remember that day saying, I'm going to live my life to the fullest. Do you know what I mean? And that was the legacy and the impact that she had on my life. Well, her name was Ethel, and I used to call her Aniette. And I remember I've never forgotten that day, and I've never forgotten her for that very reason, because it made me realize that at the end of our lives, we can either live in regret or live in impact. Fulfilled, full lives. And that really made a lasting impact on me. So my question to you is, what impact are you going to make? What is your lasting impact and your lasting legacy that you're going to make? Now, it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't even have to be extraordinary. Your purpose and your fulfillment in life might just be to be that grandmother. It might just be to be a mother or a father or a grandfather, or it could be a nation changer, history maker. Whatever your purpose is, you know in your heart, and that's been instilled in your DNA.
Or an auntie or an uncle.
Or an auntie or an uncle. And whatever that is, be true to yourself. And in Death Cafes, we talk about legacy wills. And creating a legacy will is, what are those unspoken or unseen things that you want to leave others? So a legacy will is something like your recipes, your poems. It could be anything that is important to you that you want to leave. You might have a famous, like something passed on generation to generation, but it's also items that you want to leave people. Make sure you have those written down and make sure you start creating a legacy.
Beautiful. And it's just things like those recipes that you leave behind, or those little things that you have, like those little special moments, those creative moments that you have, and those things that you just leave behind for your family or your friends or your loved ones that will help to leave that legacy in the future.
And I guess it goes back to what Shannon Adler said, crave your name on hearts, not tombstones. And so if you're creating your legacy and your story on the hearts of people, that is the true value that we provide to humanity. It's not about changing hundreds of people's lives or thousands. It's what impact have you made on that one person today, and what impact can you make on that one person tomorrow?
Okay, Stephen, so let's just recap what we've just gone through.
You know, Sharlene, I think if we look at the whole process of death, dying, it's actually, let's live.
Yes.
Let's talk about it, but let's live. And I like what you said in one of your social media posts. It said, opening the dialogue about death isn't just about confronting the end. It's about enriching the life we're living today. By normalizing these conversations, we're not inviting fear, rather we're disarming it, allowing us to live fully with gratitude for each moment granted to us. And I think that's what today's episode is. Let's disarm it, but let's live to the fullest with gratitude.
Absolutely. Just take every little moment and make it count. Thank you for joining us on the Rewrite Your Story podcast.
We hope you found this episode enlightening.
For more information on the topics discussed, please visit our website at stephenandsharlene.com.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, share it with your friends, and follow us on social media at Stephen and Sharlene.
Until next time, stay informed and inspired.
This is Stephen and Sharlene signing off from the Rewrite Your Story podcast. Thank you and stay blessed.